welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host, Sana Aslam at the Barrow Neurological Institute. Today's part of the Contract and Work series, we're going to be talking to Dr. Padma Mahant, a movement disorder neurologist at Foothills Neurology in Phoenix, who's been practicing since 2001, and she's also a part-time neurologist at the Barrow Neurological Institute, as well as Dr. Jill Farmer, who's been practicing for 10 years. She is the director of movement disorders at the Global Neuroscience Institute and assistant professor at Drexel University. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having us.
Padma, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about the different types of practices you've worked in over the years?
Sure. It's been pretty varied. I started off as a salaried neurologist. I thought I wanted to do headache once upon a time, and that lasted 3 months. But I was a salaried neurologist at that point. I did want to do movement. I was always interested in movement disorders, and wound up doing a movement disorders fellowship after the 3-month stint as a headache neurologist. It's a much better fit for me. So I finished that over at Barrow, and then became a salaried neurologist, actually within a neurosurgery practice. That lasted about a year or so. And then moved on to a solo practice, but with shared overhead, shared management of a practice, movement disorders, neurology. And then moved over to my current positions, which is basically a contracted subspecialist within a general neurology practice, as well as an hourly paid part-time neurologist over at Barrow. Same thing, movement disorder subspecialty. And then I've had a couple of other little things along the way. Over at Banner Good Sam, I had a directorship of a hospital clinic, a movement disorder, Parkinson's multidisciplinary clinic. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell over the past 20 plus years.
Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Jill?
I also have had multiple titles, but the interesting thing for me is that I've been with the same group of people. So some of this was by choice, and some of this was the movement of the machine of medicine beyond my control. So I started out as a hospital-based neurologist, specifically hired to do movement disorders in kind of like a community setting. So it wasn't associated or affiliated the hospital with an academic institution, but they were looking to have a bunch of subspecialty services that were available. So general neurology and subspecialty services. And this was my first job out of fellowship for movement disorders as well. And it was a great fit. Then the hospital ran into some financial difficulty, and the group was looking to be a little bit more academic in nature. So after we were in practice there for about 4 years, a bunch of neurologists and neurosurgeons decided to make the move and go to Drexel and Hahnemann and kind of flesh out their neurology department there, because it was on the smaller side for an academic program, and was there for about 4 years. And then Hahnemann Hospital imploded and declared bankruptcy. And if anyone's interested in the business of medicine, that's going to be a case study for years to come. And it then was no longer viable. All of the Drexel physicians and their practices ended up being dissolved, and were either looking for alternative academic programs, going into private practice, going into other hospital-based things, but Drexel itself and the Drexel physician group was no longer in existence. So what happened for me at that point was the neurosurgeons that we worked with, which I have worked with since Capital and through Drexel, ended up having their own private practice that they were essentially leasing their services out to Drexel and Hahnemann, and then they decided to take on the neurologists that were part of Drexel who wanted to join. And since I'd worked with them from Capital and I worked with them from Drexel, it just was a logical next step for me to kind of go into a large subspecialty private practice now. So I went from hospital-based practice to academic practice to large subspecialty private practice in 10 years.
That's, I want to say awesome, but at least interesting is perhaps more accurate.
Interesting is the right word, because now I'm curious to something that Padma said about a contracted subspecialist within a private practice group, because since we're talking about contract negotiation, I'm at the point now where my contract will be up in September, and I'm thinking about what my next steps might be. So it's always an evolving process.
Yeah, I think that was one of the interesting things that I learned when we started working on this podcast, is that we have this idea of there's academic and then there's non-academic. And it turns out that non-academic really isn't just one thing, and it has many forms and faces. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk to you guys, because it sounds like you've had some unique journeys, or maybe not so unique, maybe not so unique after all. But I guess, yeah, let's just go right into it. Padma, would you mind telling us a little bit about kind of your current model and how that works and how you came about to building that, if you will?
Yeah, so current model is that I basically am a contracted subspecialist with a neurology practice. This practice is managed by a general neurologist who has an interest in business. I discovered after going into my solo practice, shared management, shared overhead, that I had no interest in that side of things, even though I had to deal with it for about 10, 15 years. It's pretty stressful, and there's a lot of work that goes into the management side. That, of course, is not paid for. So there's a lot that you have to look at, and you really have to make sure that you are similar in terms of your partner, in terms of your management styles and values, and you have to make sure you have a great manager. So that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're going into a practice that already has that set up. So I decided to sort of leave all that behind. We had bought the building, so it was really very much, sort of my baby, shared overhead and management. But, I pretty much called the shots for my own practice. But it is a lot of work, I will say. There's money up front that you have to pay into the practice, and every month you wind up doing what's called a true up. So there's costs for the practice, and then you divvy it up based on the arrangement you have with your partner. I was part-time, so my percentage was a little bit less than my partner's percentage as far as the whole overhead. So I left that and joined a practice where someone loves the business side, which is great. And basically now I give over 1% of my collections to the practice, and that has been the best thing because I don't have to worry about any of the management, and it's managed well. I think that's the key, is you need to make sure that you have someone that does like it and does it well and is fair. And so that's what I sort of stumbled across, and it's worked out great. I was able to negotiate because I have a subspecialty and I had a practice coming into that practice, so I brought a lot of patients over, so I was able to negotiate my percent of collections down from the usual, and so that was helpful. But they take care of everything within the office, so I don't have to worry about anything else, including, all of the tech side for me, the EHR, all of that. I didn't have to buy into any of that. That was all included as part of the collections that they get from me. So that's worked out really well. It's very clean, very simple, and I have a lot of autonomy with my schedule, with the patients I see. It's completely up to me. There is a nurse practitioner that's a part of that practice that works with me. She has an interest in movement disorders, and that has not cost me anything extra. Basically, they know that that is, an income help to them in terms of involving the nurse practitioner. She sees a lot of these patients on her own outside of visits with me, so that's boosted their income, and just having that subspecialty has helped bring patients in. The general neurology needs are handled by the other providers. So that's pretty much my current practice in a nutshell. And then, of course, I'm part-time over at Barrow, and that is basically paid for the day that I'm there, the hours that I'm there. I'm paid for that, just a set hourly cost or daily cost, basically. And that is, again, very clean, and a lot of autonomy there as well. The practice is a little bit different in terms of, I'd say, the clinic side. I think some of the private practices are a little more user-friendly, patient-friendly in terms of portals and things like that. So there's some differences there, but same subspecialty practice. So that's pretty much where I'm at now.
Did you find that because you were, like you said, a subspecialist with your own practice and patients that you were bringing with you, that you were able to negotiate this level of autonomy that you have? Or was that something that the practice that you joined was already looking for, and you were able to then focus on some of the finer points of the contract?
The autonomy piece, I think, was always there. That's sort of the management style or the practice style of the owner of the practice. You know, who he works with, he, anticipates are going to be autonomous. But the subspecialty aspect, they were definitely looking to expand that. And so I came along at the right time for sure. And that did definitely help as far as the collections. There are some other general neurologists there that, go with the standard collection rate. And so I was able to negotiate 10% less that they would take compared to the general neurologists who just rely on whoever's coming into the practice, the marketing of the practice itself. So they didn't come in with their own practice. So I think that helped. And having that established practice beforehand definitely helped as well.
For sure. Jill, how does your current model compare? I mean, it sounds like probably different. You're not contract-based necessarily.
No, I'm salary-based, and I think autonomy is a key word here. One of the reasons why I did this move so many times, but with the same group of people, was because they afforded me autonomy. Like, I was always part of a group, but I had control over my schedule. I could adjust it as needed, and I could set how I wanted to run the day-to-day of my clinic, with time for new, time for follow-up, time for DBS, time for toxin, and set the templates the way that I wanted. It wasn't a block schedule that everyone had to follow, like 8 to 12 and 1 to 4 and that kind of thing. And that was really important to me. I'm in the Northeast. I don't make as much as other people in the Northeast, but I'm by no means I get paid well, but what I give up with the higher possibility of certain collections, I make up for in the fact that I have this autonomy that works well for me. So you kind of have to pick the thing that is most important to you. The difference that has surfaced now that I'm learning as we go through is I was buffered in some way, because while I worked with this entire group of people, there was always a larger administration that was overseeing the neurologist versus the neurosurgeon. They were their own entity. And now, being under the umbrella of the neurosurgery group, you're seeing the obvious differences, which aren't a surprise, of how managing a neurosurgery practice is a lot different than managing a neurology practice. And that, I think, is growing pains for both sides.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a big difference in at least income generation between the two specialists.
Yep.
For those of us fresh out of training, the term RVUs come up a lot. Has that been something that's making RVUs or generating a certain amount, something that features in your practices currently or in any of the models that you guys worked in before?
For me, no. I think I want to say that's more academics or maybe large, like, managed care organizations, but I've never had that as part of my contracts. It's all been pretty much just percent of collections, and deciding on, percent of overhead that I would need to pay into. Even the salaried positions that I've had have not used that as a factor in terms of the salary either.
Me either. I've somehow been shielded, thankfully, from this concept of RVU that seems to be a thorn in everyone's side. So many posts about it in the women's neurology group, and I'm like, oh, that just sounds horrible. But I think what you had just described about being a salaried base, but figuring out how much of your collections and the percentage that you have to pay into overhead and all of that, I would say, as someone who's coming out and looking at contracts, I didn't even know to ask those types of questions. And while I don't feel at all that things have been out of proportion or been taken advantage of, when you're trying to make the best case for yourself and your value, to know what the expectations are for what you can bring in through your subspecialty clinic and what then will be determined above and beyond your collection so that you can go and achieve a bonus or whatever it might be. Realizing what the percentage is of not just above and beyond your collections, but above what they're expecting you to be able to contribute to the running of the practice, and those sorts of things could be very helpful because everyone can do the math. They can figure out what the reimbursement rate is for a level 4 visit, a level 5 visit, how many patients you see in a week, and what, even though you're not getting what you charge, you know what Medicare is going to reimburse, and you can figure that out. And you're like, oh, hey, I'm clearing my salary. But then you realize, oh, it's not just my salary that I have to clear. And I think it's obvious and appropriate, but sometimes not completely demarcated. And that, I think, going forward is something that I'm very much going to make sure is part of a contract so that I know.
That actually segues really well into my next question is what are things that you wish you had made sure were included in your contracts? Looking back, I think, Jill, you answered that a little bit. And then what are some regrets, if you don't mind sharing, with some of the contracts you guys have had in the past?
I don't know if I have any regrets per se. I think
that's good.
Thankfully, I think if something wasn't working out, then I would just leave. So, and I haven't had that. I mean, other than the salaried, short stints at the salaried practices, those were just really just to sort of get started anyway, and to get my feet wet in the world of practice. First headache, then movement disorders, But so that was helpful just to kind of get my feet wet in terms of, working within a practice. But it just, those, I would definitely say the salaries there were below what would be, expected. But I was willing to do that at the time just because I wanted to, again, get my feet wet as part-time and I just wanted to grow things. So it was okay, but it was short enough and it was easy enough to switch out that it worked out fine. Mm-hmm. The solo practice, I wouldn't say there was anything really in the contract. It was pretty, on paper it was fine. The percentage, because I was part-time, was fair. I thought, the way we manage the overhead was fair. My only regret there, and this, is outside of contract negotiations. These are things that are kind of the soft aspects of negotiating things is the managers making sure that the person that you're working with, the partners that you're working with, are the people that you're working with, and that the managers are not having say that is inappropriate for their level of expertise. So if you own a practice with someone, make sure that you and the manager have to say that the manager, or you and the other practice owner have to say that the manager is there to sort of carry out what you want to do, but not sort of a stakeholder. And so I was in a situation where there was a little bit of a manager feeling like they were sort of invested in the practice overly. So some of that can happen also when you have family members that are managing in some of the private practices. So that's a word of caution, I would say, that I didn't learn until a few years into the practice, that there was a lot going on that I didn't quite realize. So that, I think, again, it's not in the contract, but it's something just knowing sort of who those stakeholders are and making sure that it's really you and your partner in terms of decision making, and that you don't have other people that really shouldn't be making important decisions or influencing the practice in ways that you don't agree with. So that would probably be my only regret. I don't think it affected my practice necessarily. It affected my happiness towards the end.
That's important.
But, as far as, the practice was well run, all of that was fine. It just was not an appropriate space to be in as an owner of a practice. So that changed, and I'm much happier now in the position that I'm in now. Managers do what they're supposed to do. The partner, everybody's on the same page with how the business side of things is handled. So I'm much happier with that.
I think for me, I would say I don't think vague is good in a contract. I used to think that, okay, well, it gives you wiggle room and you can, make things as meld it and interpret it to a way that's beneficial for you. But that only works to a certain extent if what your interpretation is melds with what the administration's interpretation is. Yeah. So simple things like if there's a non-compete and if you can negotiate down the non-compete to the bare minimum, get it out, do whatever, I wouldn't be afraid to tackle some of these things because you're a newbie and it's your first time out and you're worried and you're just so grateful that you even have a job, kind of a thing. Start the conversation and have the question, because it's not an all or nothing. Like if it's a 20-mile 2-year non-compete, you may be able to negotiate it down to a 15-year 1-year non-compete. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, it is. Or say you can't negotiate the non-compete at all. Maybe you can have it placed where the non-compete ends if you complete your entire contract term, and it's not something that persists after your contract ends. And that if you were to leave during the course of your contract, then sure, but if your 3-year contract is up and it's done, then you're no longer bound by this, because it's regardless of when and how you leave leave the company in most cases. And then if there's multiple locations for your practice, make sure that yours really focuses on the one that you're at mostly, not the 12 different locations that might be involved, because again, then you are never going to be able to go anywhere because all the circles overlap. Aside from non-compete, if you're given a term sheet, things that are mentioned in the term sheet, make sure that they're mentioned in the contract specifically. And if it isn't, or if it's nebulous, or if it's more vague, phrases like you will be utilized at the discretion of how the practice sees most fit. I mean, when I found out that was not in my contract, thank God, but when I found out that was in somebody else's contract, I was like, did you have that reviewed by an attorney? Like, why would you sign that?
Yeah, I think that's key, is to make sure that, there are little things that can get slipped in. I think an attorney is always a good idea.
Absolutely.
And especially, a contract attorney, and especially someone that has some experience with medical practices, because there can be some differences region to region, area to area. So it would be good to have someone that is familiar with, the non-competes and what's allowable, what's enforceable, and that sort of thing in your area. They can help you with negotiating down the radius of the non-compete, for example. There's a lot of things that they can do. So I think that is an excellent investment. I would encourage folks to always think about getting an attorney involved in those contract negotiations. Even if it's someone that you know well, it's important to get that outlined, because there's little phrases just like that that can... I mean, I even had, there were terms in my contract in terms of rescheduling patients. You need a 3-week window to reschedule patients. Well, good. I mean, that's reasonable, So things like that can get in there, and you just want to make sure and have that forethought of, okay, does this make sense, and what is sort of customary also, and what can I ask for? And an attorney can help you with that. If things don't sound right, certainly ask for it on your own, but an attorney can sort of help you in terms of determining what's customary if you're not familiar with that.
Absolutely. Like, so remember, they're wooing you, and they'll say like, oh, and you want to start a fellowship, you want to build a multidisciplinary team, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, this all sounds great. And then if stuff isn't written into your contract about resources being able to help you develop this, then you're stuck, because if you're an employee of a larger practice or of a hospital-based system or whatever it might be, while you are a participant, you're not always a priority. And then if you are expected to have the potential for growing this aspect, but it's not yours because it's part of something else, then you want to make sure that you have the resources available so that you can do it, or at least the mention of what the framework would be to get these resources so that it doesn't fall solely on you.
Speaking of resources, I want to circle a little bit back to what one of the things that Padma mentioned, which was having like an advanced practice practitioner in the practice to help generate revenue or to see patients. Padma, did you find that was already established there, or did you have to argue for it and then train this person and have it come out of your salary or something like that?
So the practice that I am in utilizes NPs and PAs quite a bit. So there's probably equal number of NPs and PAs to providers. That has definitely helped my numbers and my practice. And so I do not contribute, other than, again, my standard, the collections that they get from me in terms of my billings. I do not have a role in providing for her salary. I understood that she's on as well. And so that brings revenue to the practice. So it's not necessary for me to, contribute directly to her salary.
Jill, I want to take a little bit of a detour and ask you a little bit about your experience of transitioning from academic to private practice. Are there aspects of the academic world that you enjoyed that you've been able to, carry forward or make it look a different way? Or were there you just had to leave most of that world behind?
It's probably going to be a disappointing answer because I was a reluctant academic. My goal was never to be in academics. I don't enjoy, I don't know who's going to be listening to this podcast, but I don't necessarily enjoy the teaching aspect of things. So it was, I went because that was the opportunity that presented itself to continue working with the people that I wanted to work with. And like I said, I followed the people more than cared about the location. At that point, when I made the move, the hospital that I was working with was 15 minutes from my house, and I traded that for an hour and 20-minute commute because the traffic getting from Central Jersey to Philadelphia, even though it's only 35 miles, is atrocious. So there were many things that were, not attractive about going that direction. But when I was there, I was fine in it, but it's not something I feel like I'm lacking, not having the academics anymore.
I feel like both of you have, perhaps just knowing a little bit about you, have stayed involved, at least in your subspecialty community. I think sometimes out of training, we think that if you're in the private practice world, that's not a possibility. So how have you guys sort of maintained that involvement in the community, not necessarily with education, but still within being present in that subspecialty world?
I think meetings are key. Friendships, of course, are generally enduring. So that helps to be a part of that community. And then the patient advocacy organizations are huge in terms of getting involved with those and making sure that you can participate in some of those talks with patients. And so it really makes you a part of the community. For the Parkinson's, there are so many Parkinson's patient advocacy groups out there, and that really can help in terms of building your practice and staying engaged within the community. Did have some partnerships with programs that did research, so ASU's bioengineering motor control research. I was able to participate in that a little bit. So that has helped, I think, to maintain those connections that, you otherwise might feel a little isolated in a private practice. And then, of course, working part-time at Barrow has been great because I get to work with Sana, among others. That's been great. And then I will start doing a little bit of teaching, so it'll be interesting to see how all that goes. It's hard. I agree with you, Jill, because it does sort of slow you up. So, it'll be a little different, but I'm looking forward to it. I like to challenge myself and to reinvent, things so that are a part of my life. So I'm looking forward to adding that as well. So that's my take on that.
And I would agree. I mean, the patient advocacy groups are key, and that absolutely helps keep a connection to the larger community, the professional community. I have found I do a lot of consulting and work with pharma. So I've been able to network with other movement disorder specialists who also do that. And that's a mix of both private and academic movement disorder specialists. And between pharma's involvement with national organizations and patient advocacy groups' involvement with national organizations, there's an overlap, which then the more time you spend in the circles of national organizations, then you kind of start to feel out, maybe a subcommittee here, a larger committee there, a task force here, something there. So you don't necessarily have to be the traditional assistant, associate, professor level chair, whatnot, to get involved in some of the national organization and professional organizations administrative roles. It is possible, even through a circuitous route.
That makes sense. Speaking of that, I think in the academic world, again, sort of growth and development is maybe a little more clearly delineated. There's just this very, I don't want to say rigid, but a very clear path and what that might look like. What does that look like in the non-academic world? And this might vary from maybe individual to individual and practice to practice, but is it just, being on a partner track, eventually being a partner, or can it look a different way?
Yeah, for me, I've, I went that route fairly early on after my little brief stints, salaried, having my solo practice with the shared overhead. So to me, being a partner, I don't know, I didn't think it was all that it was cracked up to be. So
that's very good to know as well.
Take it or leave it, with that, because there's a lot of hassles with that, I will say. So for me, it's, I think the speakers bureaus, like Jill mentioned, pharma device, patient advocacy groups, I think that is a great way to, continue to grow and develop, and that can always open up doors in terms of clinical trials. So, yes. That I think is a piece that most practices will welcome if you have an interest in, being a PI in various clinical trials, directorships.
Yes.
When I was in solo practice, the hospital had a multidisciplinary movement disorder clinic, a Parkinson's clinic, PT, OT, speech. It was fantastic. We had a great time. I'm still friends with those PTs and OTs. They're great people. And speech therapists. I shouldn't leave them out. So, but there, that was a great opportunity as well. And it's paid on a part-time basis, but you also get the collections from the patients that you're seeing in those clinics. So that worked out really well, I thought, and, allowed you to sort of be a part of a team where you might think that that's only possible in an academic environment, but it was possible for me in that private practice as well. Those are ways that you can continue to kind of branch out and do things other than just kind of being, going to the clinic day after day, time to make the donuts, there's other things that you could do as well. So, and I think, just kind of making sure that you have a practice that is open to those things. I don't see why they wouldn't be, because it does bring, it brings more into the practice itself. So I can't imagine that many practices would obstruct that. I suppose you would want to make sure that, if you get into those things, that there's not a piece that they're going to want. If you're doing speaking engagements, you want to make sure that they're not expecting that they're going to have a piece of that. And that's never been an issue with the practices I've worked in.
I was going to say the exact same thing, and it hasn't been an issue for me either. There are people, though, where it is. So again, having that lawyer look over that contract to make sure that those clauses aren't sprinkled in there in, subparagraph 32B that you're just glossing over is important.
Yeah. And then speaking of, again, kind of delineating things very clearly in contracts and not leaving vague language, you guys have kind of talked about being salaried and overhead. And I think we touched upon this, but I wanted to delve into it a little bit more, is how do you define, doing your part in the group? Is it defined that you would see a certain number of patients? It's not RVUs, but yes, a certain percentage goes for overhead, but is there a minimum amount of income that you should be generating that's usually delineated?
For me, no, that
Okay.
was not in any of the contracts. It was just simply, and I think because in the sort of solo practice shared overhead, it was understood that, okay, this is the overhead that you got to pay, and then whatever else you do beyond that is your business. So there was, so that was understood, and I got to take a look at the collection so I could see where things were at. So I had a good idea of, okay, these are the types of patients I'm going to see. This is what I can bring in. So I did have an idea of that, but that was not delineated in the contract, and same with my current practice.
I would agree. I think I don't have, as a salaried-based employee, a minimum that I need to bring in. I think if you're on a partner track, that changes. And I think like once you switch from salary to partner, then there is sometimes certain minimums that need to be adjusted. But that's the one type of practice I haven't been in yet. I'm not a partner track in not any of the practices I've been through.
One of the other things that we haven't really talked about, things like other benefits, so sign-on bonuses and moving costs and loan forgiveness. We've touched about non-competes, but these contracts that you guys have reviewed or had over the years?
Not for me.
Health insurance?
They've been small practice, again, solo. So, but you can open up your own 401k. You can, as part of your own practice, you can open up your own and do the employee and the employer contributions. So there are some tax benefits to that for sure. I imagine maybe some of the managed care organizations or big hospitals might allow for sign-on bonuses and moving and all of that. My husband worked as an engineer for Verizon, so we relied on him for the moving and all of that. So that was helpful. Big corporations are good at that, but the small little, practices are not so good with all of that. Malpractice insurance is something to think about. I pay for that on my own. Well, that if you are paid, sort of more of a salary rather than collection based, that piece would be paid for. And within a big hospital practice, that's really, nothing as far as costs for that practice. So that is something to keep in mind when you're looking at practices, is in terms of who's paying for that malpractice, and you've got the tail insurance and all of that to make sure that that you're going to be able to cover that if you leave.
Same. I did have 401k included, but the option for healthcare, but I also get it through my husband. He's university. And so it's just a better deal to get it through him. But no relocation costs or anything like that.
Got it. Yeah. And then it sounds like both of you have been able to maintain a subspecialty practice. Has that been a challenge or easier than you expected, or you really had to look for that?
It was fine. I knew going into movement disorders that there was going to be quite a demand for it. I served on the AAN Workforce Task Force, and we were looking at numbers of neurologists needed to cover Americans in the future, and we're understaffed for sure.
Yeah.
So I knew that going into practice that wouldn't be an issue, and made sure that I found practices where that was encouraged, and where I was not expected to do a lot of general neurology. So that's worked out just fine, and it hasn't been an issue at all. In fact, I'm probably busier than I want to be, and have to sometimes say no in terms of accepting some patients. Especially at certain times, we have snowbirds in Arizona, so summers are a little more quiet sometimes than the winter, so it makes it a little easier to open up your practice at those times.
And I would say that the difficulty is not keeping it subspecialty, it's keeping it only subspecialty. So there's always that we're partnered with this hospital, we need to see more patients, and can we put, peripheral neuropathy, headache, or whatnot on your schedule? And the answer is no. I'm movement disorders. I chose movement disorders. I want to be movement disorders, and I don't want to see the other aspects of neurology. So
Yeah.
there is absolutely no difficulty with volume, just as your own subspecialty.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time and sharing your experiences and being so candid. Are there any last words that you want our listeners to hear, or last words of wisdom?
I think for me, it is, as far as the contract nuts and bolts, I think investing in an attorney is a wise investment. And then whoever you get into business with, I think the main thing is to make sure that you are comfortable with them. It is a long-term relationship, so you do need to keep that in mind in terms of sort of making sure that your values mesh and that you have sort of the right ideas in terms of how to manage the practice if you are managing it together. And if someone else is handling the business side of things, of course, that trust is imperative. So making sure that you know them well enough and you talk to enough people that you have that trust, I think, is key.
And I would say when choosing the path that you want for your career, pick what's most important to you as far as prioritizing. Is it salary? Is it autonomy? Is it geographic location? Whatever it might be, protect that as the thing that you really want to focus on. And then don't be afraid to ask, because when you are in contract negotiations, maybe we didn't get moving expenses because we didn't ask for moving expenses. So don't be afraid to ask and put all cards on the table, because if you're already at that point, they want you, and it's worth using that to your advantage.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, guys.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having us.
The Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast was created and produced by Sarah Schaefer. It is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization. The podcast is unfunded. Opinions are those of the individual participants. Music by Audrey Nath, artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast wherever you get your podcasts to hear more about constructing your career in neurology. Follow us on Twitter at NeuroBolts and on Facebook at Neurology Nuts and Bolts to stay up to date on new content and give us feedback on what you want to hear, and tell your friends. Thanks for joining us.